The Cuyahoga County Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, May 21st, 2018 will please come to order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher is absent at the moment. Mr. Schrein.
Here.
Ms. Brown. We have a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Ms. Conwell is also in attendance.
Okay, thank you very much. And do we have anybody signed in for public comment?
No, no one has signed in.
Okay, and we have in our packet the minutes from the April 23rd meeting of this committee. Do I have a motion relative to those minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilman Schwan and seconded by Councilman Tuma to approve the minutes for April 23rd. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. And before we go to our first agenda item, I would like to say that we have a distinguished visitor visiting us from India today, Niyata Mehta. And she is with Rebecca Dorman, and she's working on improving early childhood education programs. So we're very happy to have you with us today. Okay. Item number 5 matters referred to the committee. We have one piece of legislation, Resolution 2018-0109.
Resolution number 2018-0109, authorizing amendments to various bank depository agreements for public funds, designating eligible institutions as public depositories of active and interim funds of Cuyahoga County for the period 8/24/2013 to 8/23/2017, to extend the time period to 8/23/2021, and to pay any fees in the total amount not to exceed $1,411,000 that are customary or normally charged in the course of doing business by various institutions, effective 7/14/2017, in accordance with the Uniform Depository Act of Ohio.
Presenting on behalf of the administration, Treasurer Chris Murray and Director Kennedy.
Good afternoon, members of council. Chris Murray, County Treasurer, submitting 4 depository agreements with area banks pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 135.12. I just have a brief statement, and then I will be able to answer any questions that you may have. All county treasurers are required to enter into these agreements designating the listed banks as public depositories via legislative approval, whether they are active monies, i.e. used for general operations, or inactive monies for anything more than the funds used for general operating purposes. I acknowledge that these agreements are late coming before you, and I take full responsibility for this matter. I'm requesting these amendments rather than presenting new agreements because we are in the middle of 2 system implementations, one being the real property system, which is joint between Treasury and Fiscal, and also the ERP. And we work with the ERP through daily cash management. To minimize the impact of these implementations on current operations, I am recommending that we keep the county's cash management environment as stable as possible while working with our consultants. The Treasury started the process of amending both the Key Master Services Agreement and the depository agreements in May of 2017. We had to wait for the signed agreements to come back from the banks before proceeding. Some complied quickly, but one bank actually did not provide their agreement until November of 2017. As you will recall, council members, the Key Master Service Agreement was passed by council at the last board meeting in 2017. The depository agreements were apparently too late to be added to that legislation with the Master Services Agreement, so we had to start the depository process as a separate item. Treasurer was then informed by the law department that these documents should be submitted to council as contracts due to the banking fees involved with public depository services. Unfortunately, this was a new treatment of the depositories, and the workflow caused by the change to contracts required them to go through on-base, and additional documentation was required, which caused considerable time delays. And so now We have gone through the workflow. We have all signed documents, and then we are now here before you for approval. You should note that the annual expenses should not exceed $350,000 a year, which is customary for our operations. I'm available to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much. Questions by my colleagues. Councilman Tran.
I think I just heard you say that on base was a delay in getting this to us because you have to go into a contract form versus the way you were procuring this prior to that?
Our prior practice for the depository agreements was simply we would present the signed document between the banks and the treasurer. Council approved them, or the county commissioners in prior years approved them. This is every 4 years. We have now changed the way that we are administering the contracts through the county system, and because there are dollars involved, which may be needed for banking services, they're now contracts and not agreements. Because of that, there is a additional workflow requirements.
You're telling this committee that that's 10 months?
No.
Because this expired in July of last year?
That was not the full 10 months.
I can't even believe you're standing up there telling us that should have. I mean, we all know that these services have that these depositories have a commensurate dollar amount that we get credit for purposes of banking, because we're having so much money on deposit. That's not a new piece of information. It's been shared from as long as I can remember, at least 7 years.
Mm-hmm. It's not new information, Councilman, but the treatment within OPD is now different. Before, in prior years, we could simply pay for the banking services fees as an office voucher. We are moving away from that.
Ask legal for an opinion on this in order to get this. I'm just, as a body, when did we ask legal? How do we have to keep this? Or when did they tell you you have to change from just getting a letter statement from the banks?
I believe that was in December, Joe.
Mr. Chair, if I could. Mr. Sharon, we should have had the agreements in place, and we should have started the process before the expiration. There was some changes in terms of the logistics of the agreements, but nothing that should have precluded us from doing it in advance or closer.
We're sitting here halfway through the end of May, and even at best, we're 10 months from the expiration date, and we're 5 months from a December date. It just seems to me, as we sit here, to be an unduly long delay in the process. Let's shift over to the agreements themselves. We got favorable treatment, I think, historically from one bank because of how much offsetting we had before, which is our lead bank. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct.
Okay. And that was with which bank?
That's with Key Bank.
Okay. And so now we are, at least based on this, indicating a deposit limit almost equal to the Key Bank. So did we get those same kind of considerations in break from PNC?
PNC, we reached out to all of our banks. PNC is essentially going to give us the same rate fee structure that they gave us in 2013. Again, what I want to do is extend these agreements until the ERP is completed, and then we'll go to a full RFP for both the master services, and if there are any other interested banks on the depository side, we can handle that at that point.
Okay, so we got some offsets with Key Bank for depository amounts that we're going to offset it. I know we talked about this in the Investment Advisory Committee. Is that amount, would we be better off just to walk away from these agreements and just pay the fees than we are to have these kind of monies tied up in basically non-performing investments, other than the offset?
Well, the active monies, if you're talking about the inactive monies, I mean, for the most part, they're in overnight investment vehicles, which you know, that's Star Ohio as such. So we're keeping a minimum amount of money within the banks based on our own internal forecasting of cash needs.
But don't we have to commit to a certain dollar amount in order to get the preferred services back from the bank?
Yes, there is a dollar amount within which the
and what is that dollar
fees
amount?
Are triggered. We're looking at 20 million.
That we have to keep minimum to offset against the fees. And if you're keeping it on a daily basis.
I'm sorry, it's 2 million right now. Sorry, it's 2 million right now. The bank is talking to us about some proposals that they have to keep more of our money and make it advantageous for us. But at this point, it's 2 million.
Okay. All right. So, well, it just seems to me that it's to our best interest with the interest rates going up and things of that nature to really go back and look at this from scratch, not just to assume that past practices are what we should be doing. Because even if it's only an overnight, if it's overnight every single day for 365 days for all intents and purposes, it's invested for a year.
Right.
Thank you.
Mr. Schron, if I could, as Mr. Murray said, that this is going to be a priority that we bid out the banking services, because I think we could get considerably higher level of benefits if we go out to bid with this.
I would agree 100%. Sadly, to me, when we say 10 months, that doesn't ring to a priority in my mind. If these expired back in July of last year, 10 months does not constitute a priority. And even if we got the legal opinion in December, 5 months does not seem to be an expeditious treatment. But I would like to see it move a heck of a lot faster with county money.
Yeah, and just to clarify, these agreements are strictly to allow the county to have money, public monies on deposit.
Right.
So they're separate from the actual banking agreements. And what I encourage the Treasury to do is to look at all the banks in Cuyahoga County to establish their capability, if needed, to serve as the holders of active or inactive money. So not strictly limited. Like in a city, you will basically go out to every bank within the city and get them to fill a depository agreement form out, and then take it to council and have them approve it, just in the event that you get some kind of offer or an ability to put money in another bank. I don't think we should be limiting ourselves to these couple of banks.
Yeah, I mean, we have hundreds of millions of dollars that flows through this county, and it should be working for us out there.
Agreed.
Further questions? Vice President Jones, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine is sort of a basic 101 question as well. As Councilman Schron just said, these dollars should be working for us. Help me to have just a basic understanding. As we deposit with these banks, then we get, they give us less interest than we would typically earn, and in exchange we get service. Is that a very simplistic way of describing?
I mean, I could take an initial stab. Usually with an agreement with a bank, it's much like any individual has their choice. We will get what's called service credits for having a minimum amount of money on deposit. That amount will actually go up with additional funds. And then what we do is an analysis of the service credits, and anything that's not covered by those, we will then have to make a direct payment to the bank. But it's really contingent on how much money you have on deposit with each bank and what their fees are. So there's a myriad of options, much like if you want to do your checking account at a bunch of different banks. I think the thing that we have to push is we have to go out to bid with this. So we are stipulating what we want as opposed to taking what the banks are offering us.
How long was this contract? If I'm reading 4 years, 2013 to 17 was the original length of that contract.
Yes, that's correct.
Share with me, if you're aware, the services, the types of services we received over those last 4 years for the discounts we gave to these banks.
Well, we've got lockbox services, ACH. Lockbox is lockbox services. So if you're a county taxpayer you can pay your check directly into a key lock box. We will receive an image of that particular check, and that deposit is recognized with the bank. ACH services, wires, any exchanges of money, there is a cost to it, and the code allows us to pay quote unquote reasonable banking fees through an RFP process. We would come to some agreement and understanding with whatever bank won the depository agreement. We would agree on what those fees would be, and then each month we get an analysis, and my staff review the fees to ensure that they are not exorbitant.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, for such an incredible amount of money that we deposit, I'm envisioning a deeper commitment of service to this county. A program I'm familiar with is our HELP loan program, where we provide low-interest loans to this community. Mm-hmm. Is that tied in any way? You didn't mention that one. Is that a service that is in any way connected to this contract in the?
Yes, that is our depository agreement with First Federal of Lakewood. So we're taking we're earning a smaller amount of money on that, but that program, the funds support that, and I believe that's the Department of Development program, but that's what it's for. So we have to have a depository agreement with First Federal because we're keeping our money in that bank, and then they issue CDs to back to provide security for us.
Is there a list that can be given to this council that reflects captures all of the services that the banks should be delivering to us for us choosing to contract and deposit our dollars with these banks? As I look at this list, these are some of obviously the bigger banks in the city. These are the big banks. Mm-hmm. Okay. Right off of the bat, I can think of commitments to this community that these larger banks can play their part in addressing. We've had many conversations around redlining, other issues, things that these banks can literally do what they've been federally mandated to do, provide the credit necessary to protect and preserve cities in this. I'll just give an example: Garfield Heights, Maple Heights, other entering cities who can't get loans for $50,000 because the banks have not been lending under certain threshold dollar amounts. Just one of many issues that I can think that need to be addressed. And this, just sitting here right now, this tells me this is a moment where a certain commitment can and should be extracted from these banks. If they're receiving such an incredible amount of money, there's no reason why we couldn't deposit with those who share this county's commitment to the housing stock in this community. So I'd like to know who in the administration is thinking and is responsible for thinking in that way. And I'd like to know what those commitments are and if we need to start to address them at this contract time.
Councilman, it's part of, through the chair, Councilman, it is part of the goal with the RFP to include that type of commitment that you're speaking of. Right now, I don't believe that our existing contract has any requirements but besides what we already have with First Federal. I'm not sure if there's any other requirements for community lending or community investment, but that's one of the pieces or parts of of what a new RFP could include. And I have had some discussions with the Department of Development, Ken Surratt, to incorporate that into the agreement the next time we're ready to issue our RFP. The problem we have right now is with the two system implementations, it would be very difficult to have a full-blown RFP, because if your banks change, and I've been mapping the ERP or the real property environment to old banks, that can become a challenge. So we're trying to stabilize for now until we're finished with the projects.
heard that, but I can't say that I really grasped everything. You're expressed once again to me maybe the urgency of this. What is the challenge or the problem that you're facing right now?
Well, with this, right now, the projects, the ERP and real property projects, while they are ongoing, it wouldn't make sense to change banks because I'm mapping all of the work is being mapped from the new software to the existing banks. What we're asking at this point is to amend those agreements, stay with the existing banks until we are finished with the implementations, and then we can go out for a full-blown RFP and make it available to our area banks.
How long are you looking to extend this contract?
At this point, the agreements are for our extension for 4 years, but with the full-blown RFP, we can certainly start the process.
You think you need 4 years to extend?
No, I don't. I think I need 4
address-
years right now because I got to have a 4-year agreement in place based on my read of the Rise Code.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Jones, these are, just for clarification, these are just agreements that allow the county, if needed, to place public monies in these banks. These are not negotiated agreements on pricing or any of those other components. Right now, we have a master agreement with Key, which is our primary bank. We have subordinate agreements with other banks for particular accounts. You always want to have more than one bank just because of risk factors, but we should be able to put a banking services RFP on the street sometime at the beginning of next year.
So, Director, when you put out this RFP, that would not be for these depository agreements, which would remain in place. This would be a separate set of agreements that work out the exact details of the services and commitments. Is that correct?
That's correct. These depository agreements are just to provide us the legal authority to place public monies in these institutions.
So these agreements don't actually set the terms and conditions nor the commitments that banks would have to meet. They simply provide a framework that allows us to work with these banks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I get that. Okay.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to either Chris or Director Kennedy, I think Councilman Miller just kind of clarified it a little bit for me, but I was concerned on the point of Vice President Jones, why you stated that the ERP, it would be too much of a hassle for the ERP with that system being put in place because that's supposed to be done in 2019. So I didn't understand why, if this agreement was in 2021, why we couldn't just amend that date. But now hearing Councilman Miller's explanation that this is just agreements to put in place so we can do business with them. So, correct. Okay.
Yes.
Just for point of clarity, if you address an RFP next year, that would capture these 4 banks as well in the agreement?
Or anyone else that was legally authorized. As I said earlier, what our intention is going to be is to get depository agreements with all the banks in Cuyahoga County, not just the big ones.
So, Director, you can amend this legislation at a later time and add additional banks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it's your intent to do so?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, is there anyone from the Department of Development here today that might speak to the bang for the buck, as Councilman mentioned? No? Okay.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair, so the depository, the RFP going forward, so the depository agreements for next year going forward, would that include some of the issues that Councilman Jones brought up in actually negotiating some kind of give back to the citizens here for their housing?
That could be a component of the RFP that's issued that would list either requirements or requests for pricing proposals for those additional services, but that would be handled under that RFP, not under the depository agreements.
Okay, so the RFP going out next year is just strictly depository agreements?
No, these will be all the depository agreements.
Okay.
The RFP to accommodate our kind of wish list of all we would like to see a participating bank help us with, that would go out at the beginning of next year.
And it's either one or both of you kind of agreed with the statements that Councilman Jones made. Is Director Surratt involved in these conversations? I know he's been charged with the housing plan.
Yes, he is.
Okay.
He's gonna, it's my expectation, he's gonna help me write that portion of the RFP.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I would note that Ms. Simon has joined us, and I neglected to mention earlier that Councilman Gallagher joined us as well earlier, so we now have all the members of the Finance Committee present. I would also mention, to make everybody aware, that that Executive Budish and the Chief of Staff had a discussion with the Council President earlier today, and assured us that they are very well aware and concerned about a number of things where things have been coming in late, and they assured us that they're going to take action to improve control procedures and prevent this from happening in the future with the frequency that it's been happening of late. So we appreciate those efforts. But given how late it is, I think that a motion for second reading suspension would be in order. But before we do that, Councilman Gallagher.
Real quick, in the body of the legislation, it says to extend time to 8/23/21 to pay any fees in total amount to exceed 1.411. That has not been paid.
That is true.
Okay. In section 1, or actually section 2, so the Cuyahoga County Council hereby ratifies payments for fees and/or costs to U.S. Bank totaling $71,989.82 made on or after August 24, 2017. I assume those were paid.
Those were paid. Those were pursuant to the 2017 expenses. They should not have been paid, but they were.
Well, who paid them?
My office.
Pardon?
My office.
Who's the person who paid them?
That would be me.
Where is your standing to do such a thing? Am I missing something?
No, you're not.
Because this kind of isn't the first time. I mean, maybe not just with you, but this has been like a recurring thing. And if anything, do you have the authority to just write checks? Transfer funds?
No, I did not have the authority to write the checks.
How did that happen?
The process before we made the change to appropriating banking services fees, we paid these bank fees via office voucher, and that slipped through. Shouldn't have happened.
What would you have done to an employee that did that?
Explain the duties that they are obliged to uphold.
Thank you.
To follow up on that, if this legislation only proposes a framework that allows us to work with these various banks, how is it that the fees of not to exceed $1,411,000 can be anticipated and included in the legislation?
Those are estimates, Councilman Miller. They are based on our prior operations of approximately $350,000 a year for all of our banking service fees. It's at this point it's a not to exceed because if we keep less money within the banks or the banks increase our earnings credit, there's a possibility that the fees could be lower. I had to establish a ceiling for the fees. So the ceiling is at this point based on historical data.
And who's requesting? Councilman Tuma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To hitchhike off of Mr. Gallagher's question regarding the payment made. So if council decides not to ratify the payment, well, what happens? If we say, well, this wasn't authorized, we're not paying this, what happens? Because again, this is the second time, and I was assured, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that it wouldn't happen again. So I'd like to know the process as to what would happen if we didn't approve that.
I would, Mr. Tooma, I would envision then the banks would probably file some kind of litigation to recover their costs. I would defer to the law department for that. With respect to the steps that were taken, these direct payments to the bank have been occurring for years and years. There was no contract encumbrance associated with the banks. One of the things that I put in place to try and protect against this is that I'm not going to allow direct debit payments for more than $1,000 unless there's a contract associated with it. I think you're referring probably to the lease agreement that came through. Any type of agreement that we have with anybody that requires an expenditure of funds should have a contract and encumbrance that we pay against. In the past, the county just wrote checks, debits for amounts due because of that past practice of how they did it. So we have stopped that right now. Anybody who's requiring to spend money for more than $1,000 is going to have those monies encumbered so that we guarantee it goes through a process, and we also guarantee that there's sufficient appropriation to support the expense. The way it was done in the past, there's no way to detect if you have enough money appropriated until you actually cut the check.
Okay, well, I appreciate the fact that you're aware of the situation. And again, I mean, I appreciate where we're coming from on this end. These ratifications, there's a time and a place for ratifying something, and I don't think either of these two occasions were it, but I understand moving forward you guys are working to correct this situation. Thank you.
Ms. Simon, and then Councilman Schron.
So, Committee Chair Miller, I heard you say that the Chief of Staff came over to talk about ensuring that this doesn't continue to happen. Did I hear you correctly when I walked in?
You did, however, the discussion related to the general lateness with which contracts have been processed, and to my knowledge, there was no discussion about the fact that a payment had been made without authorization.
Do you mind if I ask the Chief of Staff in general what plans there are to, across the board, rectify this repeated type of issue we're facing as a committee? I mean, we just were in here, you're right, 2 weeks ago, but that was on a lease, I think, out of Public Works relating to the building. And this is just another variation of that. It permeates different departments. It's not just fiscal necessarily. So we can ask Mr. Kennedy to correct this piece, but it's a broader issue as I see it because contracts are being delayed in different areas. Would it be appropriate to find out, for my comfort level, if I'm going to ratify this, I want to make sure, I said this 2 weeks ago, I don't want to keep saying this, and I see it now. I just want to know what's in place broadly that we don't have to keep confronting this.
Okay.
That's the question. So
yes,
do you mind if the... Thank you.
I'd be happy to respond to that, Councilwoman Simon. I did have a conversation together with the county executive this morning, very briefly, with Councilman Miller, and we are scheduling a meeting with Council President Brady because we have been concerned with the lateness of these contracts. This is, as was pointed out by members of council, not the first time this has happened. And we do want to rectify the situation. We are focused on creating a process within the county. The beginning of it was referenced by Chief Kennedy, where we put a lock in place on spending money without proper authorization and without proper approval by council or the Board of Control in appropriate cases. But we want to move beyond that to examine and create a process that assures to the maximum extent possible that our departments have, first of all, planned in advance for when they're going to need contracts to be approved by council or the Board of Control. So a piece of it is the planning process. There is a lot of planning that's being done, for instance, in our Health and Human Services Department, which has been doing this for some time. We're looking at them to serve as a model for others. And then beyond that, we also want to make sure that we're not having any contracts signed or any money spent in advance of council approval. We are going to look at best practices elsewhere in terms of the processes that have been set up elsewhere. I know that this kind of thing did not happen in my city, in Shaker Heights. Now that's a small city. It's easier to manage these kinds of things. But we'll look to other entities that are more similarly situated to the county and bring the best practices here. But we are very aware of the problem, of the fact that it's happened on a number of occasions, and on the fact that it's unacceptable. I mean, there may be an occasion where there's an emergency or some special problem that causes this kind of thing, but it shouldn't be happening regularly, and we are determined to put a stop to it. So that's the message I conveyed to Councilman Miller. That's the message we went over and conveyed to Joe Nani and Trevor McAleer this morning in advance of today's meeting, and we're determined to carry out the commitments that we've made.
Thank you so much. And I would just suggest as well to look not only to other institutions, but our own history since January 1st, 2011, when we put very tight safeguards in place. And we did not see this happen at this level, in terms of even at the entry level at the Board of Control. If a contract came in and it was late, it wasn't heard, we didn't see this before. So I don't think you need to look too far, but maybe the past practices here.
Yes, we definitely want to look at the past practices here. At this point, I want to make just one other further comment. I don't know what else might be out there that is untimely. We're going to try to bring everything forward. I know of a couple of other things that are out there that are not timely. There's one that's going to go to Human Resources tomorrow that I understand Councilwoman Brown has been briefed on, and there's one small one that has to do with simply conforming to the new personnel rules that really is not very far out of date. We're going to try to find out if there's anything else so we can get it all out there and then improve our practices significantly for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Tran.
Mr. Chief of Staff, I appreciate your comments. You're coming up here and you're catching a lot of the stuff at the 11th hour. I think what bothers this body up here is that when the microphone was taken, we were told we were being presented with an issue on just focusing on simply bank deposits. You heard it, we heard it. That was the moment that there should have been a complete statement about why this oops is also embedded in the body of this legislation. It shouldn't have been the requirement of us to probe that. You should have taken the microphone and said, I've got these deposits, which is a very simple thing, and we understand that. Don't understand the 10 months, but we'll understand at least that. And at the same time, we're asking you to authorize in a ratification at post-action of something that was done improperly. My preference would be you don't mix pieces of legislation like this anyway. You do a single subject matter, take your deposits, let that stand, and then the ratification, bring those to us so we can hear those just as a standalone action for the ratification. Because to me, it makes it much cleaner to be talking only about the ratifications post after the fact.
Well, thank you for that suggestion, and we want to be forthright in terms of how we're presenting things and what we're presenting, and we'll try to make sure that we do that in the future in the way you've outlined.
If you got bad news, let's tell us the bad news. Don't try and put it in as a separate item that doesn't relate to the subject matter.
Yeah. No, we want you to feel comfortable that nothing's
because I don't really believe that the bank would have any concern whatsoever. To be honest, they got their money. Yeah. They're not going to return it to us unless we were to say we want it back, and we're going to try and claw it back because we didn't have authorization to do that. So the bank I don't believe is going to take any action whatsoever. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would think the bank's going to say no, that's a fee. It's proper. We're going to keep all $71,000, and I don't believe they're going to do anything. It's internally. I think Mr. Gallagher said it was asking, what are we going to do with this? Because this is a big check.
Yeah. Well,
when somebody does that.
Yeah. No, your comments are appropriate, and this is why Chief Kennedy has put this lockbox procedure in place so that this can't happen again.
Well, and I would just suggest they stand alone as separate transactions. Don't bring them in as a standalone piece of legislation so we can see it and look at it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree.
Just to follow up, Mr. Chair,
hold
if
on,
I can.
if I could, please. To the Law Department, is there any legal impediment for us passing this legislation that confirms the deposit payment after the fact?
No, this is something that's in your purview that you can authorize as council.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Simon.
Just as quick follow-up to Councilman Schron, am I understand, and I apologize, I wasn't here at the beginning, that this wasn't preemptively addressed, that this had happened, that this had to be teased out of the legislation?
Yes.
Okay, well, I concur with that. I mean, come on. I mean, to me, this means that you were trying to embed this in here and just have us, like, I guess, just pass this without asking the questions about what actually occurred. I mean, this is just really getting worse. I'm just saying.
All right, well, what I'm going to convey to my staff, and I didn't, I think this was not an inadvertent effort to mislead. I think it was a lack of proper presentation and clear presentation. But what I'm going to convey to my staff, matter of fact, we have a chief's meeting on Wednesday and a director's meeting, and I'm going to convey to the staff that we need to make sure that we're clearly communicating all the bad news when we have to bring something like this forward.
Thank you. I appreciate your work.
You're absolutely right about it.
I really appreciate it.
Councilmember Schron.
Look, we want you to succeed, but this is really fatiguing, and I appreciate everything you're doing and will do to make sure that we don't have to face this repeatedly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll do everything we can. Thank you.
Ms. Conwell, and we have a really long agenda. To say that we're behind schedule on today's meeting would be such a gross understatement. So, Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Chief Like, and I want to follow up on a point that Councilwoman Simon brought forward. So it was to my understanding in terms of the contracting, that is, and so I'm just going to ask you if it's true or not going forward. When the contracting department was set up in terms of Bob Mapp for HHS, it was alluded to me that eventually after he got HHS department contracting all together, he would move to HR and some others. Can you confirm if that's still the
Well, we have
method you're going?
definitely decided to lend him to other departments to be of help, and that's primarily on the issue of advanced planning. So they can set up a system so they're looking ahead to see what their contractual needs are. They have a number of recurring contracts, and so they can plan in advance so they don't have to come in at the last second and try to throw something together and then run out of time and have this kind of have a problem with lateness.
Okay, I just want.
So that our strong sense is that department has been performing very well and in a very well organized manner in that respect.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's not have a general inquiry with the chief of staff. What's the nature of what you've got?
A simple question. I think I certainly echo the things that you've heard from my colleagues, so I will not belabor that point. Mine was just a simple question. First Federal of Lakewood, they're not as large as the other three banks, just in the deposit amounts. When did they come into the contractual agreement? Was it maybe during the previous administration, if we know, or how long have they been?
Yes, this is previous administration. Again, First Federal of Lakewood has our deposits are used to fund the Department of Development's home rehab program.
That's where it happens. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I don't think anybody really wants to make this motion, so I'm going to make the motion to refer Resolution 2018-0109 to the full council with recommendation for second reading suspension. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The ayes have it. The resolution's recommended.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the review of the first quarter financial report. Director Keenan. And I have to say publicly that I sent out questions to Director Keenan yesterday on a Sunday, and she answered them. So I'm appreciative, and thank you very much.
My pleasure. Maggie Keenan, Office of Budget and Management. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How do I make it bigger? Oh. All right. So I have a brief presentation. I'll try to not talk as much because I know we're late. But I welcome interruptions. If you have questions, it's easier to handle the questions while we're on topic than going backwards. So what we have today is an overview of where we stand as of first quarter. The first quarter report was sent to council, I believe it was the 1st of May, and it's available on our website if anyone wants to read it. It's lengthy, but it has more detail, obviously, than we have here. So starting with the general fund, this is general operating and the 0.25% fund combined. We are looking at an operating shortfall in the general fund of about $6 million. That means that our expenses are greater than our revenue. This is not uncommon. We actually have operating shortfalls almost every year in the general fund, and this is a function of carryover encumbrances. So the cash balance in the fund is enough to cover our prior year expenses, but the current year revenue is not sufficient to cover those expenses. Revenue is projected to be higher than budget by about $6 million. This reflects an increase of the unclaimed funds that we transferred to the general fund. The budget assumed $4.5 million, and we ended up transferring $7.5 million. That is a one-time transfer. And then we also had some transfers from other funds, most notably Road and Bridge and Sanitary, to reimburse the general fund for debt service payments. Our expenses are projected to be about $9 million under the approved appropriation levels. Surpluses are largely in the area of general government, information technology, headquarters, office, fiscal, treasury, and board of elections all have the largest of the surpluses. Almost every agency in the general fund is projecting a surplus this year as of first quarter. We're assuming that we're going to end the year with $124 million in the cash balance, which is 28% of expenditures. It's above the code requirement to maintain 25%. We do have some reserves on balance in the general fund that's in the report. They include for $8 million for demolition for the 2 Cleveland Police Headquarters project, the Harvard Garage project, the ERP, and a few other items. Sales tax. Sales tax is, as you know, the largest single revenue source to the general fund. Through first quarter, we were actually down 1% over last year. That's adjusting for the MCO, so I'm comparing non-MCO to non-MCO from 17 to 18. We rebounded quite a bit in April and in May, so now we are 1.6% ahead of where we were this time last year, so that's looking good. We're a little bit under budget in sales tax because we did assume a 2% growth rate, and we were sluggish in the first half of the first quarter of the year. I'm hoping that we'll continue to at least hold steady for the rest of the year. For 2019 and 2020, we are assuming a 1% increase in sales tax in both years, and then we can talk about this later, but for the 2021 and 2022, I'm assuming no growth. For the general operating fund, this now excludes the 0.25%. We're projecting an operating shortfall of $3 million. Again, this means that our expenditures are higher than our revenue. Revenue is projected to be $2 million over budget. This is, as I had talked about before, this is mostly unclaimed funds, and we had an increase in investment earnings of about $2 million. Expenditures are under budget by $9 million. We previously talked about that, and there's explanations for all the surpluses in the report. Unadjusted ending cash balance, $133 million, which is 35% of total expenditures. Adjusting for all of our reserves on balance puts us at 23% of total expenditures. There's no code requirement for cash balance in the general operating fund. Best practice would be 17 to 20%, so we are above best practice. Any questions about the general fund before I move on? Okay. 0.25% fund. Revenue is projected to be $4 million over budget. This is actually due to a change in how we are reflecting sales tax. So as you know, we transfer sales tax revenue from the 0.25% fund to the general operating fund to balance the general operating fund. In years past, we showed that transfer on the sales tax line. Now we're showing it in a different line of the budget so that what's collected from the 0.25% is actually a true representation of what was collected. So revenue, if we change that, reporting is actually pretty much on budget. Expenditures are projected to be about $600,000 less than budget levels. This is actually due largely to an increase in investment earnings for the county hotel, on the accounts for the county hotel. So the county pays about $12 million a year for debt service on the hotel. This year it's going to be about $1 million less. And the cash, we have pretty substantial cash balances in the 0.25% fund. In 2018, the ending cash balance is projected to total about 60% of total expenditures, excuse me, $34 million. I do want everyone to keep in mind that this reserve is set aside, not formally, but informally, for the hotel and the Global Center for Health Innovation. So we did put a $7 million reserve for the hotel to do the room redos, which start in the next couple of years. But in terms of any other capital issues at those two facilities, this would be where we take the money from. So it looks like a lot of money, but you shouldn't get too excited. Any questions about that? Okay. Health and Human Services. We are projecting to end the year with a $3 million operating surplus, which means that our revenue is over expenditures. Revenue is projected to be right on target at $232 million, and I'm assuming the same for the next 2 years as well. We will not see a big impact to revenue resulting from the appraisal that's going to be completed this year. Expenditures are projected to be almost $10 million under budget. Keep in mind that the expenses in this fund are subsidies to other funds, and what's really driving the surplus here is that we are drawing down cash in the Office of Early Childhood's fund, so their subsidy is going to be $8 million less than we had originally budgeted. We are assuming an unadjusted ending cash balance totaling $37 million, which is 16% of total expenditures. We did have a reserve on balance here totaling $7 million. We created this at the time that the budget was developed. If you remember, that was the amount of the total cut that the Department of HHS took. So if we factor in the reserve, we have a balance of $30 million, which is 13% of expenditures, which is above the code requirement. This slide just shows the agencies that get levy subsidies. So the bar chart is their total all fund spending, and then the orange line is how much they get from the levy funds. All funds, so the county's all funds budget is all of our special revenue funds and the general fund. It does exclude capital projects and grants. On an all funds basis, revenues projected to total $1.5 billion. This is 1%, less than 1%, what was estimated in the budget. We have larger surpluses in regional benefits program. We lost some participants in 2018, and we got that information after the budget was finalized, so the revenue estimate is $11 million less than what we had expected. Debt service, at the time that we submitted the budget, we were thinking that the hotel contributes every year toward debt service. We were thinking they were going to give the county the money and we would send it to the trustee, which is what had been done in the past. The hotel is sending their money directly to the trustee, which is better. But so that's why it looks like revenue is coming in under budget. And then the Medicaid MCO Transition Fund, if you remember, we originally were given about $25 million from the state to help wean us off of the MCO sales tax. We got an additional, $6 million in that fund. So their revenue is over what we had estimated there, which is good. And the
question on that previous slide, Ms. Keenan, on that, because our chairman has been waving a red flag about planning and finance and budgeting, your chart stops at 2020, and I think if I heard the comment was that 2021, 21, 22, the planning for those events really needs to take place in 2019 and 2020. You didn't sound very positive on sales tax in those 2 years. Is that because perhaps you're reading that there's a recession that could be unfolding in those 2 years?
So I am an eternal optimist, Councilman, but everyone I talk to seems to say yes, I think it might be in the county's best interest, particularly for 2020, to maybe seek counsel from an economist. We did get some independent advice when we were creating the 2018-19 budget, who affirmed our assumption of a 2% growth rate. I would hope it would stay. We're at 1.6, but I have Sandy Turk, who was the OBM director for county for 30 years in my head, saying the good times don't last forever, and we've been going up, up, up since 2009.
Yeah, all of my readings say that by 2020, as you move into 2021, you should be looking for a recession and a slowdown. And so I just ask if that's the kind of thinking that I know our chairman wants to at least have in the thought process. It's much easier to spend if you have it. It's much more difficult to make those subtractions in a year in which they're actually taking place
Oh, that's almost impossible.
It's impossible.
And
So
that's,
the planning has to take place in 19 and 20.
I couldn't agree more, and that is why we're being a little conservative with the estimate, because it's also really easy to increase the revenue estimate at the last minute by $1 million. I would love to be proven wrong, but it's much more difficult to take away $1 million. I mean, I could name 10 things right now you could cut for $1 million, and you'd fight about it for hours, rightfully so. But so we do strive to be more conservative as opposed to giving bad news at the last minute and saying like, hey, that project you really wanted to fund is not going to happen anymore.
Director, on that point, are you going to talk any about the 5-year projections in your presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Stay tuned.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm almost done, and I can't breathe really anymore because I've been talking so fast, so this will be quick. All funds on the expenditure side, again, we're looking to spend about $1.5 billion in 2018. This is 7% under the approved appropriation levels, which means we've got a surplus totaling more than $100 million. And I have outlined what where some of the larger surpluses are. I do want to acknowledge up front, in the interest of bringing bad news ahead of time, we recognize that we have had large surpluses in public works for the last couple of years. Those projects are very difficult to estimate from the beginning. It's difficult to track them, but we are working with public works, and they are working with us, more importantly, to try to better track their appropriation levels so that we're not coming at the end of every year saying we ended the year with a 5% surplus and 40 million of it was in public works. So we're projecting it now, but I would actually hope that as we move through the year, you're going to see their appropriation levels come down. Not that we're not going to do projects, we're not defunding them per se, but we're just recognizing they're not really going to spend 125 million, they're just going to spend 100 million. So we're going to try to reconcile the appropriation levels with what they're spending. Just like we do on the operating budget, but it's just harder with these huge road projects. Then some other notable surpluses. Councilman, you had asked me about this. JFS, Job and Family Services, has about a $10 million surplus. Half of that is attributed to a decrease in overtime. So if you recall, when we were talking about creating the 2018-19 budget, this was something that the department had offered up as a potential cut, and they have made good on it. So overtime earnings, I talk about it in more detail in the report, but they are down quite substantially the first quarter of the year.
It's in the realm of a 50% reduction of what we had last year, so it's quite significant.
And then these are just some of the accomplishments first quarter. Questions? Oh, 5 years.
So, yes. So tell us about the 5-year projections for both the general fund and the HHS levy.
Okay. So it's not super optimistic. But so we did do in the first quarter report, the code requires that we prepare a 5-year forecast for, we did it for the general fund, general operating fund, general fund, and the health and human services levy funds. Be pretty conservative with our estimates, so I'm not making a lot of estimates. But for the general operating fund for 2021 and 2022, we are assuming operating shortfalls totaling about $25 million in both years. This is largely due to the fact that our the current year budget was based in part on a number of one-time revenue sources. So we have apportioned the MCO money over 3 years, but we had a lot of transfers from other special revenue funds in the budget. The unclaimed funds, that's $7.5 million, but that was one time. The amount that we transfer every year in the future would probably be a couple $100,000 at most, because we hadn't done it for a number of years, so that's why it was building up. So it's not saying that we are changing anything or that our expenses are going crazy high. It's just that now we really have to deal with the structural imbalance and address the fact that our revenue is not increasing. Sales tax is really the only one that has been going up, and like I said, I'm assuming that that won't last forever. Hoping to be proven wrong on that one. We are assuming a 3% overall increase in personnel costs. That's to accommodate 2% salary increases, COLAs, merit, however that's distributed, and a slight increase in employee health, the county's portion of employee health care costs. That's assuming then, we're also assuming no increase on non-personnel. So no inflationary increases for contracts, no new programs unless other programs are cut to accommodate that. This also assumes no savings associated with the ERP, which is a major assumption. And the only reason we're making that is because we don't have firm estimates yet, but I think there will be savings from the ERP. So again, I want to reiterate that our future year forecasts are extremely conservative. So hopefully the news would only get better. And it assumes no issuance of debt that would be repaid with the general fund. On the Health and Human Services levy side, we are projecting shortfalls, I should have done this math, of about 30 million, 25 million too, in 2021 and 2022. We are assuming no increase in revenue in any year, no change in the amount of support for the Adams Board and the Metro Health System, and a 1.5% increase in subsidies to the other funds, which would accommodate the personnel increases. So keep in mind, most of the agencies that are supported by the levies do have other revenue sources. So if we increase job and family services for salaries by 2%, it's not a 2% increase to the levies. It's for job and family services, it's probably like a 0.5% or 1/4%. So that's why it's a 1.5% increase and not a 3% increase. So it's a very, very rough estimate for the 2 out years. I do agree with the councilman that we should start planning for the future a little bit better and have some more detail behind our assumptions, but that's what we have for now.
Okay. Ms. Simon.
So I have a question on the real estate taxes. With the appraisals happening, and hopefully I envisioned an increase in the valuations. Would that yield us additional revenue?
Yes.
Okay.
So only on the general fund side.
Okay.
Because the 2 levies are, well, I keep saying the levies are protected, but it's really the homeowners that are protected on the levies from an increase. So if the value of the property increases, the effective rate of the levy will decrease.
Right.
So we're only going to generate the 104 and 127 that we said we would. On the general fund side, if property values go up, yes, we will see additional revenue.
So what's the timing on that? Well, you can get back to me.
Next year.
It's
so
all like
it would
January.
Be effective in January, correct? Yeah.
So hopefully we'll be seeing, okay, all right.
Yeah. But so I had talked to appraisal before we finalized the numbers, but I just didn't have any way to really, they were only like 70% on, and it would just be a dart if I guessed it. But yes, I think there will be additional funding there.
Anything else? Couple of things. During the budget process, we appropriated basically what the juvenile court requested for 2018, but we appropriated a lower number for 2019, and we told them that we wanted them to take the first year as a transition year to ratchet down their expense level and to fit into a tighter budget like everybody else is doing. And so far, we have not seen a lot of indication that they've made progress on that. Is that correct?
That's correct. So we have met with the court several times. They did institute a handful of fee increases and charging new fees to the families that are involved with the court, but not 100% of the families pay those fees. It's important to keep in mind, and actually they have a pretty low percentage rate of people that pay. The court, they're in a tough position. I mean, all of our agencies are, but I feel like the court is kind of unique in that they're at this crossroads of trying to remember why we treat children differently than adults, and then deal with the fact that these kids are committing more and more aggressive and heinous crimes, and they have to deal with things like the riot in the juvenile detention center. So I believe that they are trying. We meet with them quite regularly. Our analyst talks to them almost every day. They are working on it, but they have also reminded us quite frequently that council told them to come back mid-year so that they could review their 2019 appropriation levels. I would anticipate a request to increase the appropriation levels from the court, because we haven't seen anything come out in the numbers yet. And so my concern is that if nothing has really been done, that it's showing up in the numbers, how could it substantially impact next year?
Okay. Looking at the first quarter report generally, would I be correct in saying for the general fund that nothing occurred in the first quarter that would create alarm about 2018? In fact, a lot of expenses are coming in somewhat under what was budgeted. So that's the good news. But the other side of the story is that the structural problems, particularly related to the loss of the $27 million a year in Medicaid sales tax, that's still out there. And when we get to the next budget cycle, that we're going to have to deal with that, and that it could be a little more, could be a little less, but that $25 million a year or so structural deficit probably isn't going to go away unless we take some kind of affirmative action to make that go away.
That's absolutely correct. We are constantly looking at ways to increase our revenue and decrease expenses, but there's only so far we can go with rating our special revenue funds, most of which have been rated, and spreading out the pain, for lack of a better term. So there's very difficult decisions that are going to have to be made in the next year or two.
So you're saying that the one-time sources of revenue and the transfers and the various things that we did so effectively to make it work for this biennium, there's not a whole lot of that left.
Not a whole lot, no. So we can continue to transfer some surplus dollars from the 0.25% to the general operating fund that we've been doing. That's $6.5 million this year. And we are assuming that transfer will, so that's in the numbers already, that we're assuming that will continue to happen. And there's always going to be some one-time revenue. But for the most part, the funds that we have been relying on are now dwindling. And we would be concerned about dipping too far because you want to maintain some balance in those special revenue funds so the general fund's not bailing them out.
So we know that something like 70% of the budget plus or minus is personnel, and that you're not going to make a huge amount of budget progress unless you reduce the head count. And my question is how intentional or strict is the administration currently being about the notion that when we have vacancies, before we fill vacancies, we're going to make a real serious effort to see if the workload or the way the work is done can be adjusted so that we can perform effectively without filling the vacancies?
So we don't have a hiring freeze in place, but all positions that are requested to be filled, they are going through that strict scrutiny process. So when the requests come to OBM, we assume already that the departments have considered their staffing levels, considered their service levels, demands, and weighed the two and decide that they absolutely need to fill this position. So yeah, we assume that that's already been done, and I think that that is being done. If the position is, if they're asking that the position be filled, the director is indicating that it needs to be filled.
Okay. I would just for the committee's knowledge, I would just remind everybody that that in the general fund that public safety and justice is approximately 70% of the total.
That's correct.
It's almost exactly that number, and so unless there's some rethinking about how we do this whole operation, we have I think the jail population's at an all-time high or close. If you know, we're up to 2,300, and you know, the question has to be: are we actually going to achieve public safety by keep putting more and more people in jail and paying more and more money to maintain that, or are there other options? You know, I think we're going to have to look at that.
I agree. I do want to point out one thing on the jail, because this comes up a lot. So the population has been higher, if you can believe it, in the past, but we have stayed pretty consistently in the 2,300 and high 2,200s, which that's new for us. Usually we're 2,100, and then we surprise for a couple months when we're at 23. Because of the way that the jail is designed, if that population falls to 2,100 or even probably 2,000, you will not see a substantial decrease in staffing levels in the corrections officers, because the pod has to be monitored by, I don't know how many people actually monitor it, but let's say 2 corrections officers, whether there's 1 guy in there or there's 50 guys in there sleeping on mats on the floor. So, if the population could decrease substantially down back into the teens, below 1,700 preferably, then you might see a little bit savings, because you could close pods like Juvenile did when they decreased their population. But I just want to put that out there, because when the number gets to 2,100 and people get excited and think that we're supposed to be having all these savings, we won't really have savings yet, because it would just alleviate the overcrowding.
Well, Director, I'm thinking into the far future, farther down than that.
Okay.
You know,
You are an optimist.
We're going to have to make a decision at some point about what the next Justice Center is going to look like.
Yes.
Whether it's going to be a rebuilding of the existing facility, or whether it's going to be an entirely new facility. And I don't think we can take a build more and they'll come approach. If we build more, they will come, believe me.
Yes.
You know, but we just can't do that. In Summit County, they've developed an effective pre-trial release program. In Cuyahoga County, 60% of our jail population is pre-trial. We have all these people sitting in jail waiting for their trials. It's just incredible.
Just to pat ourselves on the back, it used to be 85%. The people that were predispositioned sitting in the jail.
Well, at least we're moving in the right direction.
And Lucas County, just if you're looking around and looking to other areas, Lucas County has done a very good job, too, of decreasing their jail population.
And Councilman Schreiner.
On your justice allocations, has there been any adjustments? Are you making adjustments for reduction of any judges that are being recommended by the Supreme Court? The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is recommending that we see a reduction of courts, which means courts and all the people that go in to support that. That would, if those reductions would take place, do you have any what-ifs that you've calculated in your numbers right now?
Not in these numbers, because it hasn't happened yet.
I know it hasn't happened, but she's clearly making it statements that she's going to do that.
Right. So one thing to keep in mind, and I hate to be but don't forget about this, is that the county doesn't pick up 100% of the judges' salaries.
Right.
We only pay like $15,000 or something. I'm looking at her, but we pay a very small percentage of the salaries. So eliminating judgeships wouldn't save us unless we also make sure we get rid of all the, I don't mean to say it like that, but the staff that are the staff that are associated with the judge. But keep in mind, our filings in the Court of Common Pleas, I assume that's really who we're talking about, have been going up the last couple of years. So we increased filings by 1,000 in 2017 over 16, and 1,000 in 16 over 15. So yes, we could save money if we were to have fewer judge openings and fewer staff, but we still have to deal with those. I guess what I'm saying is you still have to deal with those cases. We are by far the busiest judge and the busiest court in the state.
All right, but it's the Chief Justice bases it on population, and so as a result,
right.
If there are going to be a reduction, then it would be more than likely commensurate with all the staff that's supporting in that.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I think the logical, perhaps, response from the court is going to be, well, I still need a scheduler and a bailiff because I have to assume all of that judge's cases, and cases have been going up. I mean, the question really is, I guess, how many cases per judge do most other jurisdictions handle? Basing it solely on population is a little unfair, to use a childish term.
If the Chief Justice does it, it's going to happen. So
I
and
get
as a
that.
result, we should commensurately. It seems to me there's a place for us to see some reductions in justice.
There is a place for you to see some reductions. I just do want to point out the activity levels in the court, and that we don't pay 100% of their salaries.
Just one more comment. Just to express my concern about the fact that in the forward projections, you're generally projecting 2 to 3% increases in expenditures year over year, and very little increase in revenue. And in any one particular year, that's not going to kill you, you know. But as that operates over time, you know, it's something like $7 to $10 million a year in the general fund. It compounds every year, you know. So that's looking into the future. That's a definite concern.
Oh yeah, I mean that has been the issue for the last several years. And I do want to clarify that the future estimates, the increase is only on personnel. In the general fund, I think it's almost 80% of our spending is personnel. But we are not assuming 3% of total expenses are going to increase.
You probably should. Most of the contracts we approved at the Board of Control today included these 4 or 5% year-over-year increases, you know, so.
Well, the expectation might be that the departments would find savings elsewhere to accommodate it. The appropriation levels don't naturally increase just because you've negotiated an increase.
Understood. Okay. Well, thank you very much. That was a quick...
That is record fast.
A quick look at the first quarter, but I think we...
I know what you would have asked.
You told us not to get excited.
Next time. Right.
Okay. So next on our agenda, also related to the first quarter and the future, because we're going to have to make decisions down the road about how far we're going to continue to develop or expand our efforts on early childhood education. And as some probably know, the annual meeting on early childhood education is tomorrow morning. A little plug. It starts at 8:30, I believe, at the Holiday Inn Lakeside. Not Lakeside, Independence. Right. Holiday Inn Independence. And we are privileged to have with us the person who's going to be presenting tomorrow morning. He's going to present to us today on the economics of early childhood education. Arthur Rolnick, Senior Fellow at Humphrey School of Public Affairs, University of Minnesota. Welcome to the committee.
So, Rebecca Dorman, Director of Invest in Children. I just want to give a 30-second introduction to Mr. Rolnick, who we are thrilled agreed to come after a little begging and pleading from me on the phone, and the fact that he grew up with my cousin in Detroit. He is truly a rock star in the world that I live in. He conducted the groundbreaking research showing return on investment, hard-nosed economist, looked at the numbers, and he'll say more about this, but I can't overstate the impact that his work has had in the fact that I can talk to you all about early childhood and spending and making tough decisions in a completely different way because of him than we did in the past. And so I will let him tell you his own story, but we're just thrilled he's here. Thank you.
It's an honor to be here, Mr. Chair and members of the council. What Rebecca didn't mention, I was 40 years at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and I used to work about CRA, and I used to worry about recessions and probabilities of recessions. And so you might want to ask, how do I go from worrying about banks and business cycles to worrying about babies? That happened by accident. I happened to hear a discussion about early childhood education and raised the question that it probably is a good economic issue, and they weren't making that case. I made this to a former governor of our state, Al Quie, and a former mayor of Minneapolis, Don Fraser, and I tell people that was my mistake because they said, okay, Rolnick, how would you like to make that economic case for us? That's how I got started. I tried to explain to them my expertise was pre-Civil War banking, not babies, but it was hard to say no to a governor and a mayor. So what I'd like to do in the time that I have now is talk about the research that we did, that we presented to the mayor and to the governor, and then talk about how we took that research and made a proposal how to bring it to the real world. And we got funding privately to do a number of pilots, very successful, and we're now at the state of Minnesota. We have raised from the state, and we have some private money too, but from the state we're now up to $70 million a year, which is roughly taking care of 20% of our poverty children. Our goal is in the state of Minnesota that every child born into poverty, every child born and homeless, every child born of incarcerated parents will have access to high quality early education. And we make this argument not just on the moral case, but the takeaway here is early childhood development is economic development, and it's the best public investment you can make. Okay, so how did I come to that conclusion? So we looked at some longitudinal studies. The very famous one is known as Perry Preschool. It started in Ypsilanti, Michigan in the early 60s. They had 123 at-risk families. They randomly divided into two groups. One group gets very high-quality programs, master-level teachers, small classroom size, and parent involvement, parent engagement. I want to stress that. They did a lot of home visiting, a lot of parenting, critical aspect of this program. And followed the kids. We now have 40 years worth of data on these children. And we found that the kids, relative to the kids who got nothing, we had a control group, relative to the kids that did not get the program, our kids were much less likely to need special ed. You should see savings right there. Much less likely to be retained in a grade, much more likely to be literate by the third grade, graduate high school, get a job, pay taxes, stay off welfare. And the crime rate went down. You want to worry about jails? The crime rate went down 50%. You got to go upstream. You really want to get at the problem with our jails today. So that was the Perry Preschool study. We had incredible outcomes, but we asked a question that most economists would ask or business people would ask. Today's dollars, we were investing in 3- and 4-year-olds, roughly $20,000 per child. What was the return on that investment? So we took that economic lens to it. We knew the dollar cost and the dollar benefits. We can put dollar values on not having a kid going to special ed. We can put dollar values on a kid graduating high school, getting a job, pay taxes, not being on welfare, and we can put dollar values on the reduction of crime, and it's enormous. With that data, you can back out, there's a formula in which you can back out the annual rate of return on that investment. We were looking for about 5.8% because post-World War II, that's the annual rate of return on the stock market. If we're going to come to St. Paul and make the case in St. Paul, Minnesota, that the state should be investing in early ed, or if I'm going to Washington and make the case, if I can beat 5.8, I can say we can do better than the market. I can get you a better public investment because most of that return was public. I needed to beat 5.8. So we went through the formula. I would have been happy with 7. I would have said we can make a pretty good case. We got an 18% inflation-adjusted return on that investment. The number was so large, I was embarrassed because I thought it's kind of unbelievable we can get that kind of return. So I sent all the data to a colleague at the University of Chicago, a man by the name of James Heckman. He's a Nobel laureate economist. I said, Jim, I know you're looking at the same studies at the time. What would you redo these calculations, see if we're right? Took him about a month. I get this cryptic note back, 18%. So that was the number that I gave to the governor and the mayor. I said, yeah, you can make a very good economic argument. But now the question was, and they pushed me on this, okay, how would you do it? you could see it in the studies, but you got to go out in the real world. How would you do it in the real world? So we had a second proposal. And partly it was based on what we learned from a man by the name of Jack Shunkoff, who's at Harvard. He's the editor of a book, From Neurons to Neighborhoods, on brain development and how much of our brain is developed by age 3. The famous study is the Romanian orphan study, where it was extreme neglect. And what they showed is by age 3, the brain of those kids were a third smaller than what it should have been. They had virtually no interaction with adults. And so what the neuroscientists say, and what Jack Shunkoff was telling me, Rolnick, if you're going to make a proposal to bring to the real world, you better start early. Starting 4 isn't good enough. You really have to start prenatal, or at least at birth. So we needed a proposal that had, there were a number of challenges. First of all, you need to target the most at-risk. This is about our at-risk children, okay? Once you get to middle class and above, you don't get those kind of returns. It's very nominal. In Minnesota, we have the largest achievement gap in the country. We know what the problem is. So the problem is the achievement gap. You better start early. You better target to the most at risk. You better get the parent involved and engaged. Without the parent, if you think you can just take the child and put them in a center-based program and get these results, you're not going to get it. And then it better be quality. I know you've got a quality rating system here. It's a critical component of what you do, that these children are in high-quality programs. You can't just put the child in front of a TV and expect to get these results. And finally, we're going to fail if it's not scalable. If we're only doing these for 20% of the children in Minnesota, for example, we're failing. I could tell you, my business friends, if they saw an 18% inflation-adjusted return, it would not go unfunded for more than a day. So scale. So what was the proposal? How do we bring it to the real world? A fairly simple idea. We stole these ideas from higher ed. Scholarships. Scholarships which include funding for home visiting nurses and parent mentors starting prenatal. And then when the child turns 3, they get a 2-year scholarship that the parent decides which program works for them. They have to be a 4-star rated program. We have a 4-star rating system. We call it Parent Aware. Go on our website and we'll tell you all about the early ed programs in your community and what their star rating is and why they got their rating and what percentage of their kids actually start school ready. The parent chooses. They can choose Head Start, they can choose Montessori, they can choose language immersion, they can use a music program, but the parent figures out what works for best for them and their child. We empower and engage those parents. That was the proposal. Pretty simple. I was fortunate. A man by the name of Warren Staley at the time heard me speak. He was the CEO of Cargill. CEO of Cargill is one of the most successful private corporations in the world. And Staley said to me, okay, Rolnick, that sounds good in practice. Let's get you out of the ivory tower there at the Minneapolis Fed, and let's see if it'll really work. He sets up, it's just 2006, something called the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation, MELF. It was going to be a 5-year experiment. We raised $20 million privately. He brought on the board Target and Best Buy and Ecolab and General Mills and Blue Cross Blue Shield and United Healthcare. We have some amazing corporations in Minnesota. We brought the CEOs onto this board. They kind of bought this idea and they said, okay, let's see if we could really do it. So part of the money went to create Parent Aware, the rating system. The other part went to do a pilot, to see if we could implement this and do it efficiently. We picked St. Paul. Mayor of St. Paul got wind of this, and he wanted to be the first one out of the chute, offered up his staff. We circled a low-income neighborhood in St. Paul, which is known as Frogtown, and very diverse, very low income. And we said, if you live in Frogtown, income is 185% poverty or below, congratulations, you get a scholarship for your child. That was it. Very user-friendly. Had problems at first getting it out. We went knocking door to door, but once the word got out, we ended up spending all our money, and we had 650 scholarships. Critics said it's not going to work, Rolnick. It's not going to work because you don't have 3 4-star programs in a low-income community. Well, once the market learned that we had all these parents, our scholarships paying up to $13,000 a year, within a short period of time, Montessori expanded their program, the St. Paul School expanded their pre-K program, for-profit New Horizon put an actual new facility in that community and started hiring people from that community. That's real economic development today and in the future. So we had and within 6 months, our parents all had significant choices of 4-star rated programs, so none of them had problems. Had to be culturally sensitive. Well, if you had gone into these programs, one in particular attracted Hmong families, and if you went into that program, there was Hmong culture throughout the school because among families where they're customers. The market works. So then they said, oh, the parents wouldn't use all the scholarships. Many of these parents are so disengaged, they wouldn't care. Every one of our parents used the scholarships. Oh, they're going to move, and they're going to be all. Two of our parents moved. Once they got the scholarship, they didn't want to go anywhere. We asked our parents, what did they think of this whole program? And their biggest concern, and many of these parents hadn't graduated high school, their biggest concern was that would kindergarten through 3 be 4-star rated? So now I've got engaged parents asking the question, they wanted quality in their K through 3 program. I declared victory right there. We brought in an outside evaluator, Stanford Research Institute, now known as SRI from Stanford. So outside evaluator took a look at it. And again, we were showing some terrific results. Our kids were performing in reading and in math well above national norms for low-income kids. Most of them, virtually all the kids started school ready. 30% of kids in Minnesota in poverty don't start ready, so they were assessed ready in terms of cognitive skills and social and emotional skills. Anyways, we had so much success with that pilot that we received $45 million in Race to the Top from the federal government to replicate what we did in St. Paul throughout the state. So when we call them transformation zones, we're replicating it as we speak in St. Paul again, in Minneapolis, in what's known as the North Side Achievement Zone in Minneapolis, in an Indian reservation up north, White Earth, and in a low-income rural community, Itasca County. And we're getting the same results. It doesn't matter, race, religion, parents are parents. You give them this opportunity, and these kids will succeed. So that's the program we got. Funding from the federal government, and I think I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, the state starting to recognize how important this is, and this is both sides of the aisle. This was an apolitical issue. We are now up to $70 million a year, which is roughly 20% of our kids, and again, we're seeing these incredible results. And the one thing that I want to conclude with is this: we weren't just affecting the child, we were affecting the parents. And we're starting to document that our parents are going back to school, they're going back to work, their income is going up. And what's critical here is the neuroscientists would say we're reducing the toxic stress in that family, so that more likely that that child's brain is going to develop in a healthy way. So there's a combination of benefits from the parents, benefits to the parents as well as to the children. In fact, I'll finish on one anecdote. This was out in the western suburbs of Minnesota. Fairly wealthy area, but they have pockets of poverty, and they've raised privately money for about 175 scholarships. And about 10 years ago, we had one of our parents come up and talk about their experience with this scholarship. So this is a parent who had fought in Iraq, and she came back to this country, and she's got 2 very young kids, and she's a single mom, and she's very depressed. Her minister said, there's a new program out here. You should apply for it. And she got a scholarship for a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And she, telling us this story, she brings them up on stage. And the kids clearly are bright and happy and just changed their lives. And then she said, and she, because her kids were in a high-quality program 5 days a week, 6 to 8 hours a day, she was able to go back to school. She now had a job, and she was engaged. There's about 300 of us at this breakfast. I think we were all in tears at the time, and I think we raised $125,000 at that breakfast for more scholarships. So it's working. My view is we almost know too much. There's so much in the research that says if we don't get to the kids this early, these are the kids, if they start that far behind, they don't catch up. These are the kids that drop out of high school. Guess what they do if they don't get a high school degree in this economy? It was always a human capital-driven economy in the past, but it's even more so going into the future. And so this is your future workforce. This benefits your community. As I argue, this is the best public investment we can make. Mr. Chair, that concludes my comments, and of course I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. And as you know, we've invested locally in a big way in Cuyahoga County, and if we could get the state of Ohio to do something on the level of what the state of Minnesota is doing to add to what we're doing locally, we would really have something. So I appreciate your testimony, and I look to my colleagues to see if there's any questions, and we'll start with Ms. Simon.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Good work. We really appreciate it. So my question is about lead poisoning of children. We still, unfortunately, have a dilemma here with children getting exposed at really early ages. And with those children, if they enter a quality pre-K program, are they already diminished that they won't be able to gain the strides that the other children gain?
As you probably know, there's a lot of research that shows lead poisoning affects brain development, and it is devastating in a lot of ways. I think the critical component of our program is the parent mentor that starts prenatal. When they get into these homes, they work with the families, and they work with them in a holistic way. So if we see lead poisoning, if we see there's an incident, we test that. We try to fix that right away. So I think if the earlier you start, the better chance you have of success health-wise. And I should say early childhood development is as much about health as it is about education, and this is a good example. So the key, I think a very high return component of our program is we don't wait till 3 or 4. When we're successful, we get to the mom prenatal. There's various ways of doing that, and we're working with a lot of the school nurses, for example, and the health community to identify the parents that soon. But I think that's what you should be aiming for. There's an awful lot of, again, everything, all the medical research that I know, the health research and the education research, the earlier you start, the better. And I really mean prenatal here. On White Earth 2 years ago, half the kids were born addicted. You can't wait till age 4. Thank you for the question.
Vice President Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
Just to give back to you, is the core of the success here the fact that you provided monies for scholarships? And were those scholarships for, you said $13,000 a year, was that a full 4-year scholarship?
Okay, so $13,000 a year, that was the private funding. The state is only at about $8,000 a year. We're trying to get that up to about 10. That was for that was for an annual amount for 2 years.
2 years.
So if you're one of our recipients for 3 and 4-year-old, you get the scholarship, but included in that is a home visiting nurse, and that runs roughly about $3,000 a year per family.
So having these dollars towards college was a driver?
Not to college.
Oh, not to college?
No, this is to a Montessori program. No, I'm glad you asked that.
Okay.
No, it is so the parent can send that child to a very high quality pre-K program.
A pre-K.
Gotcha. Yeah. Now it's interesting you bring that up because we actually in our Northside Achievement Zone, the Promised Neighborhood, we do a graduation ceremony for our pre-K kids, and we march them up on stage with their parents. Again, we're all crying when they're up there, and we give them a T-shirt. And that T-shirt has a date which they're going to graduate college, okay? And we give the parents a lawn sign, which they put in, future college graduate lives here. And I'm going to tell you, the North Side is one of the most crime-ridden communities in the country. And we're turning it all around to be all about education. And the next thing we're working on, now we're not there yet, but we eventually, not only do we want to give the child a T-shirt, we want to give the parent a letter from the governor of the state of Minnesota saying, if your child graduates high school, they will get a full ride to a 2-year VOTEC school or a 4-year college. So ultimately, we want to get where that's going. We want to let these parents know that your child is very likely not just to graduate high school, but is going to go on to college.
What was it about the Montessori schools that was superior to the existing schools that in the area that drove the success?
That's another great question. We don't think one size fits all. I can tell you with my 2 kids, one did real well in a music program and one did very well in a language program. We want the parent to choose what works for them. So our parents get to choose either Montessori or St. Paul's School has some terrific pre-K programs. We got a New Horizon, which is a for-profit that is terrific. We have some faith-based programs that have terrific ones. But let the parent figure out what works for their child and what works for them. That's the difference in our approach. We empower the parents, not the program. Programs have to compete for these parents. And it changes the paradigm quite a bit because the way Head Start works, and Head Start does some great things, but right now, if you're a Head Start parent, you know you're lucky to be there because they only fund maybe 30 or 40% of eligible parents. and you have no choice. If you don't like it, it's too bad. With our parents, you can choose Head Start, but you can go to Montessori or you can go to New Horizons. So we empower the parents, not the program.
With these private schools, public schools, or both?
Both. We call it mixed delivery. We need all hands on deck. I'll mention something in Mayor de Blasio, New York, who's got a universal program. That's both public and private. There's no way you can bring this to scale without using the great resources we have out there, whether it's the Montessoris, the public schools, the faith-based, whatever. You need them all if we're going to do this and do it right.
I agree with what you said. My next and last question is, how did Minnesota navigate the politics, successfully navigate the politics, so that, as you said, it was bipartisan to do this for the children?
I'd like to take credit for all of it, but it was the business community. And like I said, I was very lucky. Okay. I mentioned Warren Staley, CEO of Cargill, Ken Powell, CEO of General Mills, Doug Baker, CEO of Ecolab. We had some really powerful business people recognizing this is their future workforce. They want to be in a community with a highly educated workforce, low crime, and so they had the foresight, and they could look out 15, 20 years, because their companies are going to be around, obviously, or odds are, for 15, 20 years. So it was a business community, and if you looked at our MELF board, we had a man by the name of Charlie Weaver on this board. He was the executive director of an organization called the Business Partnership in Minnesota, representing 100 and some different companies. He was formerly the chief of staff for Tim Pawlenty, our governor, okay, Republican. But I'd say half the people on that board were Democrats or independents. And they kind of got it. They got the economic argument anyway, and recognized they wanted to make, this was a 5-year commitment. Let's show the state that we can do this and do it well, and then hand it off to the state, and that's what we did.
And I said my last, but this is my last question. Jeffrey, Canada, and New York, the Harlem Promise Zone, and it sounds like some parallels. Are you familiar with that? And tell me how that.
Jeffrey's a good friend.
Okay,
had me speak to his board, and my point, Jeffrey's amazing, and they're getting amazing results. My problem with Jeffrey's program, and he had me say this to his board, was I can't clone that guy. I need him in Cleveland, I need him in Detroit, I need him in Minneapolis. But what I can do is get funding so that every child in Harlem gets a scholarship, and they could choose his program or choose the competitor down the block. And all Jeffrey said was, bring it on.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. We appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
And we will see you tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have one more quick item on our agenda, and it is the update on the April ERP report. Who is going to, I think we have Matt Carroll to present for us. Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. I apologize. Matt Carroll is not available right now. My name is James Ham, the Deputy CIO for Cuyahoga County, and I'll be providing this briefing.
Okay. Thank you very much. Please proceed.
We did have a couple of slides we tried to pull together. They're up on the monitor now. If you'd like to go ahead to the first slide, or the next slide, I should say.
Just hit the button. Oh. Hit the forward.
There we go. Okay, enter. Thank you. Wish I knew somebody in IT who could help out with some of this gear. These reports, Mr. Young, our interim Chief Transformation Information Officer, and I, we began working with the ERP project due to some changes in leadership there back in the early part of March. One of the first things we did was work with the current Executive Steering Committee team and identified a number of issues and concerns. We were able to ascertain that there wasn't a lot of good, healthy communication, not as much transparency and visibility into some things that they wanted to see. And we also received that feedback directly through Matt Carroll from council, council's concerns as well. So what we did in March was put together a draft of a monthly briefing that we hoped would provide some more visibility and insights into the program. Our second one we produced in April. It's kind of a living document, and it's evolving as we go to try to keep up with communications or information needs. So all I have simply done here is taken one slide here to review just the contrast and compare the table of contents from the 2 months that you received so far. And on the next slide, I'll talk to a couple of them specific bullet points from across the sections. So as you can see, mainly with the April status report, we did add a new section and expanded the appendices. We envision the appendices expanding and contracting as needed to supply you with corroborating details where it may be necessary in a given month. But the basic framework now in the table of contents is provided you a schedule and an update on the work activities so you can see what was planned to go on and what did go on. A snapshot of the programming finances as of the month end. Lets you know the key issues that the Executive Steering Committee is addressing that are out there and that the dragons they're slaying to try to keep us on schedule and to be successful. We will have a section that will begin filling in June. We're working on a benefits, cost-benefit analysis as a foundation for a more robust return on investment model.
On that point.
Yes, sir.
We had been told prior to this moment that we would see that in the May report. Has that been rolled back a month?
No, sir. The May report I'll get done probably in the early part of June, as we wait for actuals to come in and get some updates in and get some other schedules updated. But the intent is to at least provide you with an overview of the benefits schedule. Of course, the cost schedule is pretty much embedded in Section 2 there from an investment perspective or capital expenses. We're still working on an ongoing operating cost model impacts.
So the benefits model will be in the next report?
I believe that's actually going to be a separate session, but yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And then 5 was a new section we added because there were a number of questions that came up about project organization and staffing. Where are we? Do we have the right people in place, both internally and externally, to get this thing done? And then 6 is a standing section where we'll just provide you all the documentation on any change orders that may impact scope or schedule or cost in terms of the delivery. And briefly highlighting just some of the changes. In Section 1, we did include, or we did show that actually the first 2 waves, or the next 2 waves of the Enterprise Asset Management Platform did launch on time, one at the early May and one about mid-April. So those are all tracking okay. In the work at a glance section, if you have the copy of the report with you, there is or I could pull one up if we'd like. There is we added a column to show the directions of the arrows so you know as you read through what was planned and what actually got done. Are we trending up or down? Are we in green, yellow, red conditions? Those kinds of things. In Section 2, for the finances, we did provide for a revised summary table, which we hope improves readability and improves understanding of where we're at. And you can see at a very high level, year over year, what's been spent year to date prior to this year, and then year to date, and then what's forecasted for the remainder of the year and into 2019. And the summary schedules, of course, will continue to evolve and change as we identify and capture our actuals and then update our forecasts based on what we're able to get done. The last section I did want to mention again was the new section where we've provided some information on how the overall program is organized in Section 5, and then Appendix D to that section actually details all the names of the individuals involved from the M4 team, from the ERP team in IT, and all the other kind of non-IT folks who are involved now or who are scheduled to be involved to finish this thing in 2018.
And on this point, have we in fact hired the overall project manager as contemplated in the last couple of meetings, or is that still in progress?
That still is in progress. Chief Likens has developed a a new project management organization structure, a PMO structure. So what we have now is we've got dedicated project management resources within each of the main areas, one in fiscal, one in HR, and one in Public Works to help drive the implementations forward. The newest gentleman is dedicated to the fiscal branch. His name's Jack Ryan. He will be starting actually next week, and we anticipate that he'll be able to evolve into the overall project management role from there. Slightly different structure than last presented.
And is Jack Ryan, is he a county hire, or is this by contract?
It's by contract.
Contract, okay. Okay. Continue.
That's the request came in to me about 10:30, 11 this morning, so that's what I've been able to pull together. Is there any other questions I can answer?
This is fine. We had extensive discussions a week or so ago, and we were just looking for a quick update on since the April report came out since our last meeting, and you provided that. So this handles what we had in mind. Questions by my colleagues, Jack?
Just a couple quick ones. At this point in time, now I'm glad that we got some data points coming to us. I'm sure you listened to Zig's comments the other day in presentation to us. One of the things that we had asked for was the reasonableness of asking for a fixed date to which we can see our monthly reports coming to us. Do we have a date to which everybody's agreed to?
I was advised that you wanted to see that by the 8th of the following month.
That was what we advised, but okay. Is that an agreement? So if everybody's happy, then we're happy. Okay, that's great. Okay, we'll check off that block then. Good. So
if you don't have it, that means I screwed up.
We're not looking to see anybody get screwed up. We're just looking for a dependable date to which we can see the data points.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's not our objective. Is not got you. It's to get you as far as the information altogether. And Zig had done a quick analysis of saying subcomponents should be broken down into subcomponents, time dated, and say this is going to take half a day. Multiply that times the number of subcomponents as they roll out, as the rollouts go out there. Have we been able to get an estimate as far as if you again listening to go back to his comments and testimony that he said that would be the way he would go about it. Doesn't mean it's the right or wrong answer, but to get an actual timeline of measurements saying this is there are 24, I think 26 components in that one times X amount of time to be determined by you folks would give so we can know whether we're on time and on task. Was there any picking up of fixing the time based on the subcomponents to multiply it times that and then put it against your timeline that you talked about here?
Yes, sir. The short answer is that's all in progress. If I may, when Chief Young and I stepped into the program, mid-March timeframe, we began to build several plans where we felt we were lacking. Infor provided us with a very detailed project plan. It's 130 pages long, but that covers just their piece of the puzzle. So we sought to build out our financial plan, our financial forecast, number one, which you now see in your report, our resources plan, number two, which you now see in sections 5 and Appendix D, and also then our task plans, which we're now building out and marrying to the Infor plan. So the estimates to complete our tasks with our resources and at what cost are now all in development and laying that out. So it's been a long process, and the ESC is the Executive Steering Committee, comprised of Mr. Luke Lycan and of course Matt Carroll, Dennis Kennedy, Douglas Dykes, and Mike Dever, along with Chief Young, have all been instrumental and very active in trying to pull all this together and make sure we've got all the players identified so we can get the work scheduled and get those types of time-based estimates out.
Okay, that's exactly what Zig had suggested, was taking the Infor project list, which those activities need to be done by them, and that we need to apply ours to it to come up with the total of where we are. But where we are right now is in the planning stages of laying those out as opposed to actually quantifying those, it sounds like.
Well, we've got the.
I mean, quantifying as far as the timeline. I'm sorry, I don't mean as far as
Yes,
activity.
at this point, I've got it down to a week. I know resources by name, by week, what activities, high-level activities you're performing. And so we've estimated, for example, someone from our human resources benefits team, such as Joni Harbaugh, would be involved from the end of June through September, at least 80% of her time. So that's also then help us drive the fact that, okay, we may need a backfill for that resource in the department, and we're putting those people in place now as well, so she can be freed up in time to deliver on that.
Okay,
Again,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to, I use that as an example. It may not be the exact numbers, but roughly we're aligning our resources, our internal folks, week by week through the process, but we haven't got it all the way down to hours yet. So,
Well, the only cautionary advice that we got from our consultant was when you start doing percentages and week by week, it's easy to say, yeah, this week is allocated to this person, or this week is allocated to that person. When you actually do the next breakdown of the subcomponent saying, this is a 20-minute project, this is a 3-hour project, and you break it down into the individual subcomponent tasks that need to be checked off, was his suggestion, is actually taking that and then stacking it back and finding out whether it really does come out to a 1 week for this, or is it really 60 hours as opposed to 40 hours and things of that nature, because you don't really ever get 40 hours out of anybody's work week. And so
like we never budget more than 0.8
Yeah.
For a full-time equivalent. Yes, sir. And to that point, there are a number of bases over which we intend to try to track our progress back to you. There, other than just simply percent completes, which also can be open to some subjectivity.
Right.
We look to say more concretely, well, more of an earn burn or an earn value approach that, you know, if you've got 25 test cases to produce this week and you only get 20 of them done, you're behind. If you get all 25 done, you're on schedule. If you get 25 done and 5 from the next week done, you're ahead of schedule, and we look to correlate that to some factors that are more meaningful.
Okay, and that's exactly what you're saying. Break it down into the subcomponents. And so there's no right or wrong answer. It was just his comments as to subcomponing the activities to give you more clarity. And I wish you good luck. And I hope our Jack Ryan is as good as Hunt for Red October, and he brings it in the ship for us. Thank you.
So what I hear Councilman Tron saying is that we have to look at the work that needs to be done, and in each time frame figure out how many hours of resource time from whom needs to be available to get that work done, and make sure that those resources are available when needed, so that we don't find out later that we don't have half what we need to get the project done on time. Is that where you're getting at?
It is, but I'm just parroting what Zig was telling us.
Sure.
Last 2 times.
Okay, fine. Anything else? Any miscellaneous business? Thank you very much for your presentation. There being nothing further that holds our attention, we are adjourned.